Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very socially distanced Chroma video, otherwise known as a Warframe guide. Hello, and yes, as the intro may have given away, this video is going to be about Chroma. I've made it kind of my goal for this up-and-coming year that I kind of want to go back and revisit a bunch of my old guides to innovate them and make them a bit more professional, if that word could ever be used with anything I do in my life. This is to bring them up to my more modern style, to add in information that may have been added by DE or things that I may have missed from the previous video. And seeing as my old Chroma guide looks like the person recording it was a very fat Jared Way having a mild stroke, I think it's about time that we go back to the Chroma guide, seeing as that was probably one of my earliest guides I ever made. Also, he has had an update, so this video will serve as a purpose to not only give across better and more efficient information, but also to cover what has also changed about him. And of course, ladies and gents, if you like these guides, if you want to see more, if you want to continue to support us in what we do, then please go down to the description below and make sure you follow my Twitter, my Twitch, my OnlyFans, follow all my things, subscribe and like this video. That way I'll know that you want to see more content. And if you have suggestions for what kind of guides you'd like to see in the future, then please comment down below as well, as I do take feedback and suggestions from you guys. And if you feel like joining my fellow Tenno here, you can join us on Twitch for daily streams where we actually get you guys involved and do stuff together. Chroma, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, is a frame of two halves. Not so to mention because he can literally split himself in two halves, but that's a different story we'll cover about later. Chroma has one of two main playstyles. You either play him for his buffing capability, where you build for power, strength, and duration to be able to buff yourself and allies around you for as long as possible, relying on the power, strength, and then your element type to, well, generate very powerful buffs. This is a very simplistic playstyle that kind of lends itself to why most people play Chroma, but that's not to take away from the fact that Chroma does have a lot of utility with a range build. Range being the pivotal element in this, as you can then rely on range to allow your AoE crowd control and also AoE damage to affect a large area whilst holding it down with your effigy. With this, you're going to be relying more on the range and a little bit of power strength to then hold those locations. Now, although Chroma only has two main playstyles, there's never really a wrong decision with any of them, because Chroma has so much inherent power that regardless of whichever way you play him, it depends on the build you go for as to which abilities you're going to focus on. And although there's a lot that goes into these abilities, they're quite superficial in how you play them. So once you understand the fundamentals, that's it. You've got a frame that is inherently very strong and can provide great benefits for your team, as well as also being a great solo frame. So for anyone looking for a simplistic yet oddly complicated frame, or at least a satisfying frame, I would put it, then Chroma might just be your boy. Now, Chroma is obtained in one of the more unique ways to get a frame. His main blueprint is simplistically enough obtained by completing the new Strange quest, rather than being something you buy off the marketplace. However, instead of his pieces being something you get from assassination missions, you get them from doing the junctions leading from Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The Neoptic chassis and systems then requiring crafted components of other frames to be built in order to complete them, just as if DE didn't want to confuse you further. Thankfully, most of these components you'll likely be able to farm for before you actually end up getting all of Chroma's individual pieces. The only one that might be slightly awkward is then the systems, which requires Sarin's systems from the Killer Dithame to complete. Now, let's move on to the abilities, shall we? Starting with Chroma's new shiny passive. It's not got a name, but Chroma's passive basically gives him a triple jump. So you do a jump, you do a second jump, and your third jump gives you dragon wings to help you embody the true dragon you've always wanted to be. Now, this doesn't necessarily give itself much credence to being useful, but it does embody the idea that sometimes, thematically speaking, you do need some abilities to represent what kind of theme your frame is going for. And I'm not gonna lie, having that extra jump does mean you're gonna be able to have that verticality and movement capabilities that a lot of frames may be lacking. Wait for it until DE decide to implement this as a mod for all frames, and then Chroma will cry in a corner somewhere. Chroma's one is the ability that kind of defines him as being that fire-breathing dragon type. His one is called Spectral Scream. Spectral Scream will emit a fiery breath which projects in front of him in a cone. The damage this deals can be rotated through by tapping the ability key, thus rotating between hot, cold, toxin, and electric damage. No longer is this an ability where you need to actually have the element type as your energy color. So when this ability is held, Chroma's fiery breath will project out a 10-meter cone and deal 400 of the selected damage type per second with a 100% status chance, with an additional chance to stagger enemies that are hit too. Enemies struck by the direct beam will also then spread the effects of this beam to other enemies within 10 meters. The changes made from the update have actually made this far more effective than it's ever been in the past, and honestly actually gives some credence to putting more effort into a range AoE control build. This is a super fun ability and is really the only other way to play Chroma beyond his typical full buff strength notion that most people will go for. And you'll find a bit of a trend here, as that if you want to get the best out of one of his playstyles, you'll basically have to go whole hog into it. As in, with this one, you'll need to go for full range and a little bit of power strength to get the most out of it. Whereas if you want the benefit from his other type of playstyle, you'll want to go full power strength with less range, therefore not getting as much use out of his breath. But the thing is, I like this now. This actually feels like it can be very meaningful in lower levels, clearing rooms and doing good AoE damage with good AoE status spreading. As you have to keep in mind, you are dealing a guaranteed status proc to anyone affected, and with the ability to chain that damage between enemies within 10 meters of the initial target, this not only creates a powerful status spreader, but also just generally good damage. I guarantee you, if you give this a try now, so if you've played Chroma in the past and you've said, well, this one isn't that powerful, give it a try now. I guarantee you will see a massive difference between its potency. The augment for this ability is called Afterburn, kind of like that feeling you get on your face if you shave without aftershave. When deactivating your breath, Chroma will emit an elemental projectile, dealing 100 damage for each second the ability was active, up to a maximum of 500 damage. This then scales based on power strength, and honestly, if you're going for a range type build anyway, you're gonna kind of want to have this on there, just the sheer notion of having a little bit more damage with what you're doing. However, I would say that you have to keep in mind that with any augment on Chroma, any augment you use is going to then simultaneously reduce the potency you have just because you're lacking on the base stats alone. Elemental Ward is Chroma's 2 and comes off as more of his signature ability that should always be active regardless of build you're using. Because at the end of the day, a buff's a buff, right? Elemental Ward will emit an aura buffing you and allies within 12 meters, providing an offensive and defensive buff based on your elemental alignment for 25 seconds. The buff you generate will depend on your chosen element via your Spectral Scream. So tapping your one to rotate the element will then rotate the buff you generate for you and your allies. These buffs are then the following. Having heat active will award increased health by 200% and inflict 200 heat damage to enemies within 5 meters. Electricity will increase shields by 100% and cause incoming damage to be reflected as an arc discharge, inflicting 1,000, yes, 1,000% of the damage dealt back at enemies within 10 meters. Toxin will then increase reload speed and holster rate by 35%. Furthermore, the enemies within 5 meters will have a 50% chance of having 5% of their total health reduced per second. And finally, Cold Element will increase armor by 150% and reflect incoming damage directly back at the attacker, dealing 300% increased damage. The energy color and buff that you decide to go for will all come down to personal choice. My recommendation for the sheer sake of utility and convenience is going to be Cold or Heat for your survivability. Then it also will then complement your third ability as well, but we will talk more about that when we get to the third ability. Especially seeing as all of these bonuses are then affected by power strength, making them even stronger. And with a default duration of 25 seconds, you don't even necessarily need to mod for that much duration to get the most use out of these. Everlasting Ward is the augment for this ability, and it basically gives anyone leaving your aura radius the ability to retain their buff for 100% of the remaining duration, allowing you to apply buffs rather than just being an aura generator for your team. Again, it's a little bit of a unnecessary thing, and I don't think it'd be worth losing out on possible strength or utility of having a larger area of effect just for the sake of the convenience of your team being lazy. Vex Armor is then Chroma's 3, and probably his most signature buff ability. It's what makes him good for Eidolon hunting, and it's what most people will try and aim towards using initially when they pick him up. This will generate 2 beneficial buffs for yourself and allies within 18 meters for 25 seconds. These buffs are then the following. The first of these buffs is Scorn. Scorn will increase your armor. Every time you take damage to your shield, it will generate a stack of Scorn. And this Scorn buff can stack up to 350% bonus armor. Fury, meanwhile, is generated when taking damage to your health and increases your base damage up to 275%, and is why complementing this with heat damage from your elemental choice gives you room to jump in to damage yourself to generate your buff and not have to worry so much about dying. You'll notice here that the trend is you need to damage yourself to be able to pump out more damage or to have more survivability. Now, this is a very simple ability. This is then complemented by your power strength. With the right amount of power strength, you will notice that your buffs are huge. And this encourages a management of finding ways to damage yourself, as you're going to need to damage yourself to actually generate the buffs in the first place. Now, you need to make sure this is constantly active, as it's going to be important to maintain the buff for as long as possible, because the last thing you want to do is build up all of those stacks to then lose it all to need to build up all the stacks again. Vexing Retaliation is the augment of this ability, and again, it's a slightly useless augment as you don't want to waste modding space for it, but what it does do is when taking shield damage, you will deal 150 puncture damage to enemies within 9 meters. And if you take health damage, you will deal blast damage instead. A fun little augment that can be nice for absent-mindedly blasting through low-level missions, but again, I wouldn't say it's anything worth wasting your modding space for. Chroma's 4 is called Effigy, and it's probably one of the most visually appealing abilities in the game. Chroma will shed his skin, leaving behind a statue of his armor where he cast the ability initially. This statue will have 8,000 health and attack enemies within 20 meters, dealing 400 damage based on the element of your Spectral Scream. It also periodically knocks enemies away within 5 meters, and additionally periodically stuns all enemies within 30 meters. This ability is a great thing to use when you know you're not going to be on the move, as it allows you to create a zone of exclusion where your effigy will do all the killing for you, while you run around like a streaker at a British football ground. The only thing to bear in mind is that you should probably only use it when you have the excess energy to do so, as it does channel your energy rather than being based on duration. While you're naked and stuff, you gain a 20% movement boost, but a 50% armor reduction. And additionally, enemies killed by the effigy have a 60% chance to drop additional credits at a heightened rate. Chroma can essentially be used here for tangentially farming credits at the lower levels should you need them. Now, I actually really like using this ability at lower levels because it's a really simplistic cast and forget type ability, which are very hard to come by these days in Warframe, that will basically do the work for you whilst you're running around like a naked boy who's just decided that a birthday suit is an appropriate attire for a comic convention. Anyway, my point being is this is a really fun ability that can complement everything else you're doing. It's something that with a bit of power strength and a decent amount of range can really help you lock down areas and can really work well for those defensive type notions like a mobile defense or possibly an interception where you want to hold down an area and make sure enemies aren't getting too close to the location you're defending. Guided Effigy is the augment for this ability and is probably the one that will impact one of Chroma's abilities the most out of all of them. This allows you to hold the ability and cause your effigy to travel to your designated location, dealing 2,000 damage per second to enemies that decide to fall in front of it. Then, upon reaching its location, it will roar, stunning all enemies and, well, causing them a lot of earache. This then being boosted by range and power strength, meaning you can be quite potent at dealing large areas of damage and knockback effect once it does reach its location. If you do plan on using a range and effect utility build, then this is definitely not one that's a bad choice. It is just going to be a little bit weird to fit in and have enough energy efficiency to make sure it's lasting long enough. And finally, and very quickly, because this video's already taken 3/4 of an hour to record, the builds! As always, don't take my builds as gospel, use your own innovation, blah, 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 do your research and have builds the way you want them to be! Don't be a cookie cutter. When it comes to aura mods, use the aura mods that you so decide for. I would recommend either Corrosive Projection or Energy Siphon, but this first build we're looking at is going to be for the power of buffing. So this is going to be relying on as much power strength as possible. This will give you the most power possible from your Elemental Ward and your Vex armor. You need a little bit of duration, you need as much power strength as possible, and that's pretty much it. Because your buffs are going to last as long as possible, you don't need efficiency for the most part. However, slapping on Streamline will definitely make it a bit more convenient for yourself. So the big power here, power strength, intensify, blind rage, transient fortitude, power drift, augur secrets. Everything after that, duration, convenience, survivability. So long as you've got the power strength on there, this will give you the best self buff and be really good for solo play, or Eidolons for that matter. And this second build is a bit more generalized. This is the one that will focus on the idea of your team utility and area of effect. And up until recently, Chroma's never really had much of an incentive, but with the changes that have been made, there's a lot more potency to his utility and team efficiency. So you're focusing on range with your reach and stretch, and then you're going to go for power strength with things like intensify and transient fortitude. But here's the thing. When it comes to your utility build, you base it on how you want your range to be affected. Yes, you definitely want some range, but realistically speaking, you don't even need that much power strength. So you can swap out power strength with overextended to make much more effective use of your overall area of effect. This one will be very much dictated based on how you want to play it. The only things that I would absolutely suggest, do not go below 100% power strength, and make sure there's at least some emphasis on range. Everything else can kind of be how you want to make it. This is this one that worked perfectly for me. It was very generalized, it covered a decent area, and it wasn't too far out with the range to make it too weak because I'd put too much focus on the range area of it. And again, as much as we like to do this, a new player-orientated build. Now, Chroma is incredibly simplistic, as I mentioned earlier. So for the sake of a new player, the only thing you really want to do is just make sure you're staying alive. So we're focusing a lot on survivability mods with Steel Fiber, Vitality, Gladiator Resolve, and Gladiator Aegis. Obviously, the Gladiator mods come from Plains of Eidolon, so you have to do the bounties there to get those. Then everything else are your baseline mods with Streamline, Continuity, Intensify, and Flow. This will give you a generalized, nice, broad spectrum build that will cover all elements and help you learn Chroma. And that's the guide, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully it's been informative. Hopefully you've learned something. This is going to be distinctly better than my last Chroma guide, I can assure you. I mean, even anything would be better than that guide at this stage. So, hopefully it's improvement. Hope you like it. Come by the Twitch channel sometime so you can join our fellow Tenno here, and I'll see all of you top hatters in the next video. Hurrah!